a wartime footing here. A bunch of us are up here in New Jersey in the middle of the tropical storm without power. I'm operating from my car in my driveway on my phone. So, but welcome and thank you for attending. We're going to power through just like we should. I'm Ray Adams. I'll be the host and moderator for today to the best of my ability from the phone here. And thank you all for attending. A couple of quick housekeeping items here. We have all of the attendee mics muted, and question and answer session will be via the Zoom feature. It should be on the bottom of your screen. You can submit your questions through there, and we will try to get to the questions at the end of the panel. Any questions that we don't get to, we will try to get you answers and post them on our website. This is the first of a series of webinars that we're looking to do, not just on counter UAS, which is a very important topic, but on other relevant topics that are affecting the UAS and UAM industries. So just a quick background on what ULTRA is. It's the Urban Low Altitude Transport Association. We're a nonprofit organization based out of New Jersey. We focus on the advocacy for the UAM industry in large metropolitan areas and the immediate suburbs. We were formed this year, beginning of this year. Again, we're based out of New Jersey, and our goal is to bring a practical operational view to the industry. We'd like to say that we'd like to find the solutions out there that are informed by our current practices and policies in aviation so that we can deploy these systems in a relatively timely manner. Our unofficial motto is, if it ain't broke, don't fix it, right? So real quick background on myself. I am a 30-year-plus air traffic controller out of the New York metro area. Spent my time at the New York Air Traffic Control Center and at Newark Tower. I've spent the better part of 15 years advocating up on Capitol Hill for aviation safety issues, and I spent a number of years deploying air traffic modernization systems with the FAA. But that's kind of enough about myself. I'd like to introduce you to our fantastic panel now. 3 of our panelists are up on video. One of our panelists, who is in the middle of the monsoon also, is only on audio. We just had to figure all this out in the last hour and a half because everybody's power went out. So I'm going to start with Congressman Frank Lobiondo. Frank, would you be willing to introduce yourself to the attendees, please?
Sure. Thanks, Ray, and thanks to my fellow panelists. My name is Frank Lobiondo. I served for 24 years in the United States House of Representatives, was a senior member of Transportation and Infrastructure Committee, and the last 6 years chaired aviation, worked closely with all aspects of drones and UAS, and very excited to be a part of what this next chapter is. Upon leaving Congress, I started LoBo Strategies. I am the CEO. My former Chief of Staff, Jason Galinas, is my partner in this. We tend to try to help people connect the dots, whether it's to get a result, political intelligence, or anything along those lines.
Great, Frank. Thank you very much for that. We all appreciate your contribution to aviation over the years. We're sad to see you leave the Congress, but I know you're doing well in your current role. So next up on our panel is Dawn Zoldi, and I hope I pronounced that correctly. Dawn, would you be happy to introduce yourself there?
Absolutely. Hi, everybody. Dawn Zoldi here. I'm a licensed attorney, 25-year Air Force veteran with the United States Air Force JAG Corps, and I'm the CEO and founder of P3 Tech Consulting. My company is all about connecting people with a passion for advanced technology platforms with the policies and programs they need. Spent almost, like I said, 25 years in the JAG Corps, retired from active duty in March of 2018, became the general counsel at the United States Air Force Academy for business matters. And actually, I still have a federal position at the Academy as the Deputy Director of the Center for Character and Leadership Development. And so for that reason, I have to give the mandatory disclaimer that I'm here in my private capacity today. and that what I'm talking about and what I'm speaking about does not represent the views of the Department of Defense, not intended to endorse any particular organization, and certainly not intended to influence the actions of any federal agency or their employees. So that's it. Thanks.
Great. Thank you, Dawn, and thank you for your service. Next up, we have Travis Moran. Travis, why don't you give us a little background on yourself?
Certainly. Travis Moran, I'm a VP with Welund. We provide threat and biasment information services for global political risk threats around the world to some of the largest companies in the world. Retired federal law enforcement guy who worked a lot in energy industry after I retired. And as a result of that, drones and the construct of drones and threats and critical infrastructure has been a piece of that puzzle. And always happy to be here and share this information. So thank you.
Well, thank you, Travis. Appreciate that. And last but not least is Ultra's Vice Chairman, Ron Leach.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for joining us. Appreciate you taking the time out of your day to participate. I have about 30 years of aviation experience between fixed wing and rotary wing. I spent 15 years within this New Jersey State Police as a helicopter pilot prior to transferring out of my aviation experience, my role there. I was asked to come up to the special operations section to work on a few projects. One of those projects happened to be unmanned aircraft systems. It came to the forefront with the New Jersey State Police in 2012 when actually before that, when the Super Bowl took place in New Jersey. Some issues for counter UAS, what we were going to do if during the Super Bowl someone wanted to fly a hobbyist type drone into the area, what we were going to do about it. And that had my command start to think about what we were going to do as far as mitigation, and then that flipped over to how do we implement this new technology into state police operations. We already had the helicopters, but how can we make this as another asset within public safety? So after my retirement, I found that there was a lack of information out there for public safety providers who wanted to start a program. As most of the folks in the audience, I'm sure know that you take an unmanned aircraft system and you put it in the hands of a local public safety provider, and you really open up their world for their response capabilities. So the idea behind my company, Leach Strategic Partners, was to provide that information and also bring to the table the law enforcement understanding of what we can do when we do have non-compliant operators in and around the areas that we don't want them. So later on, Ray and I hooked up, and we also saw how UTM was coming into play in the Northeast, and understanding the airspace at a lower level. Ray and I kind of had the idea that some of these technologies wanted to come in and play in this area and expand upon the transportation, but didn't really understand this ecosystem. So we kind of brainstormed a little bit there, and that's what spawned the Ultra, where we could provide some information services to these technologies that aren't used to working in this busy Northeast environment.
Well said, Ron. Thank you again thank you all the panelists for attending today, or for actually participating today. And thank you to the attendees for coming today. We really appreciate this, taking your time to listen to what our panelists have to say. Again, this is our inaugural webinar. We plan to do more of these. And for anybody who joined after the initial intro that I gave, we're working on emergency power here due to the storm up in the Northeast. That's why you're seeing my car in the background. So we have one of our panelists on the phone.
You are muted.
And we've got some echo there.
Hey, Frank, you may want to hang up your phone.
That any better?
All right, that's much better. So let's get on with our panel then. So just a brief overview. As we all know here, in the past few years, that UAS usage has skyrocketed, driven by the technological advancements, which have driven the cost of these vehicles down significantly and driven their simplicity of use up significantly. Just about anybody nowadays can go to a Walmart, a Target, a Best Buy, and purchase a UAS and fly it. It's pretty simple to do, and it's within financial reach of a lot of people now. So in reaction to this proliferation, the FAA put out some rulemaking where they would institute a drone registration process for all new purchases of UAS, and then additionally on top of that, some licensing requirements for commercial usage of the vehicles also. So per FAA's 2019 statistics, there are approximately 1.1 million registered UAS for hobbyist use and about 412,000 commercial drone registrations on the books as of 2019. So with all of these registered UAS, and on top of that, a likelihood of a significant amount of unregistered UAS, we see a potential for misuse of the technology. So maybe we could look at an article that I saw just recently, came across my LinkedIn feed, about a drone swarm invading a nuclear plant last September. Now, I saw this just this week or last week, and this happened in late 2019. I was a little shocked by it. I see a critical piece of infrastructure, it's a hazmat type of a situation, and swarms of drones around it. Now, on its face, it seems a little like out of a movie to me, a little scary. So I'd like to talk a little bit about the threats that are in the current environment right now with UAS. So Ron, could you take that question? What are you seeing out there as threats in the current environment?
So I'm going to borrow from Travis here. His common terminology is the clueless, the careless, and the criminal. Those are the three basics for non-compliant drone operators that we're seeing out there in the field. The clueless are the people who generally, they may be gifted a drone, or someone goes out because they think it looks like a cool hobby to get into and start flying their drone without really understanding the impact they may have to the national airspace system and some security issues around critical infrastructure. The careless knows better, but they do it anyway. And that could be a 107 operator, the commercial, the real estate person who wants to just get the job done. Possibly the public safety professional that has good intentions, but doesn't really grasp the ramifications if you violate the 107 laws. And the criminal, that doesn't fit into the other two categories. Now with the clueless and careless, you can probably, mitigate that risk by education, either, in person, or the interactions that you have, direct them towards some appropriate websites. Some of the criminal cases that we're seeing pop up just recently, an ISIS supporter was arrested in the UK. He modified a drone with a release device for possibly, an explosive or something nefarious for sure. And that fits in with what happened in Pennsylvania last year, where there was a guy dropping bomblets on his ex-girlfriend's property, and it was really causing some confusion and concern because no one really knew what was going on. Another example, we have foreign nationals trying to use drones to hack into facilities to either steal intellectual property or processes. Prisons are dealing with contraband drops, not so much for the weapons that it's the concern, but the hard currency that may exist behind walls, things like cigarettes, drugs, even porn. Some other issues that come up is, what is law enforcement to do about some of these issues? Are we powerless to interact, or do we have some ability to take on the problem? Well, it depends on what you're talking about. If you're talking about just mitigation, interaction, and detection kind of issues, you can probably address some of those issues. But when we start talking about technology a little bit later on, we'll discuss what some of the limitations are that state and local law enforcement have versus what maybe someone in the federal level can do to mitigate drone issues.
And Ray, let me chime in there real quick about just an additional, for the people that are concerned about the energy side threat, that a very recent example that just came to my attention. I can't say where, but a Mavic was found at a site, an energy site next to a non-critical, thankfully, substation. I'm not going to say where it was found within the environs, but it was found with strings that were dangling down and then carrying a wire underneath it that could be used to be drug over transmission lines or into a transformer. So it's one of those things that's out there. How they're going to manifest this, obviously we don't know. We all know this is happening. We all know that it's just a matter of time. As Frank will be able to talk to later, it's being able to get some legislative momentum to address these threats. But anyway, I just want to provide that anecdote because sometimes we get lost in how, this, we've all heard this, we all know a lot of this stuff, but then every time we have an anecdotal piece like that, it helps provide some impetus. So I'll be quiet.
That's a good encapsulation of the threats that we're seeing. From our perspective in air traffic, we've seen drones in airspace where they're not supposed to be that have shut down airports. We've had Newark Airport shut down over the past couple of months from a UAS operation that was over Teterboro Airport. There was a report the other day from last week, I think it was, of a drone sighting over Teterboro Airport again. So in these densely populated areas, in these dense airspaces where there's a lot of aviation activity, it seems that these drones pose a threat to other aviation assets. Can any of you address kind of what the potential damage could be to an aircraft? I know there's some controversy around how much one of these can cost. Can anybody out there address that a little bit?
Well, that's one, maybe Frank can talk to this, and that's, if it's not classified, obviously, but that's been one of the big complaints we've all had. We research money. Well, why haven't we done that real hard research into what would happen? We've seen modeling from University of Dayton, we've seen modeling from Ohio State and some other places, I think University of Iowa, about injecting them into a modeled aircraft engine. Well, we need to have testing to, really understand that threat from, funding and then research to an actual engine that is running to see the damage variables between, let's say a Phantom 3 all the way up to a Mavic or now the Skydios or whatever. That would be very helpful. Maybe, I don't know, Frank probably can address that stuff.
Well, I'll try to. And Travis, you're absolutely right. This is something that should have been done a long time ago. And just sort of to set the stage here, years ago, when the UAS or drone technology was just sort of coming online from the military, we in Congress and the Aviation Committee had just a terrible time convincing the FAA that they needed to figure out how to integrate into domestic airspace. We had to, by legislation, create 6 national test sites, which once we did, could have been a tremendous resource, but the FAA basically chose not to utilize a lot of the data and information. And even as I was exiting Congress, we were trying to get the FAA to run the tests like that to see what the impact would be with a drone. And so far, they're challenged with funding. It hasn't been a priority. And you're going to probably hear me say this more than once during this call. Unless something really bad happens, they don't seem to react to it. So as long as something really bad has not happened in this particular area, you're going to see them making excuses, I think. And that's where I'll come in with some other suggestions as we move down the line.
Hey, if I can just chime in real quick. I mean, I'm a lawyer here, right? Not necessarily my lane, but having been in the Air Force for 25 years, we know what a bird can do, right? Or just FOD on a flight line to an aircraft if it gets sucked into an engine. So, the fact that it's a drone, I mean, it's clear there's going to be some serious problems. I think the threats are so varied here, and frankly, I'll say the sky's the limit, right? You can do with a drone, you're only limited by your own imagination in the bad things that you could do or a person could do with a drone. We see them being used overseas, not just for surveillance, right? But for dropping bombs on people, for, talking the smalls, not the large reapers and predators that, that the United States military is using for targeted operations. We heard about the prisons, and if you guys recall, we did have a drunk droner land one on the White House lawn, and that was in 2015. And that's when people started getting energized about this, right? Like, oh, they could actually land on the White House lawn, and we don't know that this is even coming. And so I don't know that we've made a ton of progress really since then, but the threats are real, they're varied, and I think some of the limitations, as the Honorable Lobiondo just said, are legislative in nature. So looking forward to talking a little bit more about that.
Well, it's a lot of, we've got a lot of content there, a lot of stuff to talk about. I'm sure we'll address a little further. Let's move to the next topic. Dawn, could you happen to pull up that article on the NYPD deployment? Do you have that available? We could display.
I will give it a whirl.
Once again, we're working in emergency mode here due to the storm. So luckily, Dawn is geographically separated from the rest of us on the East Coast. Here it comes.
Is that the right one?
Nope, that's not the right one. We'll work off. I'll tell you what. I'll just talk to this. You can just take that one down for now. So effectively, another one I saw. It's okay. I saw an article the other day about the U.S. Open, which is in New York, and the NYPD is out there in the press expressing that they are going to deploy a counter UAS unit to the there it is to the event. So counter UAS, it's a big topic, right? There's lots of threats out there, potentially, especially soft targets. We just expressed some of that. We've got the NYPD, which is the Primo Militant Police Force in New York City to take care of these issues, and they're sending a counter drone team to the U.S. Open. Travis, can you give us an overview of what counter UAS actually is, and some of the technologies, how they'd be deployed in this situation?
Sure. I think in reading through that, one of the most thing that jumps out to me the most is team versus technology. So what that suggests to me is that they're going to be reliant, just my inference is, and what we've seen obviously around the country because of rules and regulations, is that they're going to be deploying some type of awareness technology, whether it's RF, radio frequencies, radar, video analytics, acoustic, whatever, or a myriad of them, to understand what's in the operating environment, and then probably have teams on the ground. And probably Ron can attest to this too. That's what it seems to me from reading that jumping off the screen when they say team versus technology, because obviously they don't want to talk about what they're going to use, but we know, I don't think that the US Open probably will be designated as a SEER event, which is the higher level events that where those counter technologies where you can actually mitigate or authorize, they're very rare and very infrequent. So it seems to me that that's what it would be, and the technologies are what the technologies are. It's a complicated problem. And it gets more complicated all the time. Some will get really good at unpacking one individual piece, but it's a layered approach. One of the things I know they'll have a problem with there is the trees, foliage. Gives them, it's given the PGA tremendous trouble over the last few years about trying to use technologies just for that. So it has to be really a multi-layered approach, whatever they do. To be able to, and whatever they deploy, to be able to see, and maybe Ron and Dawn and Frank, whatever, can chime in on this. But from what I'm seeing, that would be my impression.
Sure.
Yeah, I just wanted to. So in the questions, we have more of a comment. When you talk about UAS and the definition, counter UAS and the definition of it, there's distinct components, right? So there's the detect, track, identify, which is the first part, and then of course the defeat or the effect, right, which is the second part. And so I don't know, Travis, if you can kind of break that down using those categories, the detection versus you know, the disable or defeat aspect of it, and kind of what you're seeing out there. Over.
Sure, and thank you for that clarification, and also let Ron chime into that. The detection piece is exactly that, and there are various different ways to do that. As many of the people in the panelists, I'm seeing a lot of friends actually on the panel. I'm not the panelists, but participants know this information as far as what a detection is. It's being able to understand what's in that particular operating environment, whether you do it by radar, which is movement cavitation, RF, identifying the frequency of the signal. And then trying to triangulate and or acoustic, trying to pick up the noise cavitation that is within the atmosphere. Video analytics, there's some interesting companies out there doing things with video analytics for this now, but it has to be, line of sight is very important for that as well. And then there's the mitigation pieces. That's always the problem of being able to press that button in the kill chain. Because there's so much liability that attaches with the kill chain, because we have to understand that that is a seizure. Regardless of what you do, when you press that button, you have initiated a seizure of property. So, that's some of the nuances there. And obviously, Ron, you want to chime in as far as that goes?
I think the seizure is important to understand. When a public safety entity does take possession of an aircraft, not only the seizure aspect of it, if it happens to be dirty, you now own that product. So whatever's on it, if it's nefarious, could cause damage or harm, you're now responsible for that. Law enforcement, where a lot of them don't understand, and this is where I'm hoping to get some of the word out with the conversations, that the limits that are placed on the mitigation end of it or through the FAA, since the FAA recognizes drones 0.55 pounds and above as an aircraft, interfering with an aircraft has the same penalties as a manned aviation type flight. There's no excuses for conducting interference, regardless of what you may think is a crime in process. The FCC, you can't jam. When bomb units deploy for suspicious devices or get called out and they know they're going to use jammers, they have protocols in place where they can go ahead and make notification prior to getting on scene. Also under the FCC is wiretapping. You can't intercept signals and decode them without the appropriate warrants, which falls under the seizures again. NTIA, National Telecommunications and Information Administration, they look at drones as like flying computers. You can't hack into them or spoof them without penalties. So under the color of law, you can't interfere with the aircraft. But finding the operator, if you're doing RF detection in the background, it's probably an easy one. Finding the operators is the only way to really to mitigate a drone problem, have the person land the aircraft. So there are ways of dealing with them with drones. And just because someone's using a drone to commit a nefarious act, it doesn't really change the position of what law enforcement can do as a prosecutorial approach. You can still use the behavior of the person flying the drone to build your case against them for any criminal activity. It doesn't have to touch upon the airspace.
So that all leads into, it's great you were talking about that, Ron, because the next topic that we have up actually is law enforcement's role in UAS events. So Dawn, if you can try to pull up that one thing and look at that, you're getting quicker by the second with that. This is a New York Times article. If you can see it, that was posted. I can't see the date on my phone because it's too small. If I blow it up, maybe this looks like last year, 2019.
Yeah, no, it's the 1st of August, 2020.
2020. Oh, I probably should get my glasses on. Anyway, drones used in crime fly under the law's radar. So, I mean, as you've heard so far, as our attendees have heard so far, there are a number of issues with counter UAS. There's no cohesive policy around it from what I can see. But Ron, I'd like you to talk a little bit about a law enforcement officer's role when he's called in on an issue that involves a drone. Maybe it's a spying or it's a nuisance or whatever it is. Can you give us a little background on that?
Sure. This is going to become more prevalent, I think, as remote ID becomes prevalent. The answer is going to be call law enforcement. Well, there's a little bit of lack of training for law enforcement out there, how they're going to handle counter UAS issues. So when someone's called to a job to take a report, they're going to talk to a person to say, hey, there's a guy flying a drone in my neighborhood. Travis found a great video last week where there was a lady who was interfering with a 107 operator who was just doing his job, taking pictures of real estate. So it's important to understand what it is that you're being called to address. Is it nefarious, or is it somebody doing their job? And the perception is that it's criminal. Now, most states have laws on the books against peeping Tom, voyeurism type issues, harassment, assault. If a drone is used in that manner, that's just merely the tool that's used for the commission of the incident. What's important to understand, though, is law enforcement should be able to diffuse a situation if it's a harmless inspection or photo job or critical infrastructure check. And I think it's important going forward that coming up with ideas of how to educate some of the law enforcement partners and first responders that reporters have rights to be out there videotaping things for the media and other people. This is their line of work now. The educational component, I think, is going to be important going forward.
Would any of the other panelists like to weigh in on that? I'm not sure if you guys have any experience with law enforcement in this specific case.
Well, this is Frank. That's
All right.
that's one of the things that
it's
we
definitely. Go ahead, Frank.
This is one of the things we struggled with, because if in fact there's a problem, who do you call? And where's the jurisdiction? And how does this have to be laid out in legislation? And then is it federal? Is it state? Is it local? Does it matter depending on the infraction? So as Ron was saying, this gets very complicated, and we obviously did not get it all figured out. So this still has to be determined, I think.
Well, I guess there's, it seems like at all levels, again, back to the ambiguity about jurisdiction and the overlapping laws and preemption and all those types of things that may prevent us from actually putting together a real response to a UAS being used for, as Ron said, nefarious reasons. It sounds like this industry is going to continue forward and grow and scale, whether it's from UAS package delivery to UAM moving people around. The potential danger of a UAS, or the community loss of confidence that comes along with these types of nefarious uses, may slow the deployment of these technologies. So we're kind of concerned about that from the Ultra perspective. So I'd like to take a look at some of the law that's around the use of counter UAS. Dawn, if you have the slide on law and policy, there it is, right there. So if you look at this, it says back in 2016, I believe, the FAA expanded safety and security programs in some legislation and provided some new authority for drone operators. Now, I know Frank could probably speak to this also, but Dawn, can you give us the basic law and policy around UAS and maybe some of the overlaps?
Yeah, absolutely. So, what I would say is any analysis, right? You got to start with the first question, like where Ron started. What is the person doing, right? So, are they clueless? Are they careless? Is this criminal? And where is this happening? Because that will be relevant to the jurisdiction piece. And so there's a lot of things to talk about here, and we don't have a ton of time. So I'm going to give a really quick overview of some thinking here. If we're talking about clueless, careless, we're talking maybe people that, don't have their proper registration, or they're acting in a reckless manner. And so that's when local law enforcement would approach them and ask them for their paperwork. Show me your, your that you are registered. Show me that, that you have a certificate, assuming that they can find that person, right? Sometimes attribution is a challenge. There are a lot of federal crimes, and the Congress has been very active, I would say, primarily in the 2018 FAA Reauthorization Act. A series of new crimes that were put into 18 U.S. Code specifically relating to drones. I'll give you just a couple examples. I'm not going to get into all of them because there's too many. But for example, in Section 363, there's a prohibition now, a federal prohibition of with civil penalties for equipping a drone with a dangerous weapon. That's one example. Another is flying a UAS in a restricted building, and there's specific buildings, right? Not surprisingly, the White House, the Vice President's house. And there's a list of those in the Act. So those are just some examples that Congress has taken a very active role in creating additional, very drone-specific federal crimes through the FAA's Reauthorization Act. Then you also have to look at state and local laws, right? And what is out there for the state and local police to actually enforce. Because for those maybe that are not familiar, local police don't have the authority to enforce a federal law. They don't really even have the authority to enforce an FAA infraction. They're supposed to be calling the FAA and reporting that. So that is a very big challenge for local law enforcement. What do we have at the state level? Well, it depends, right? So some states may have nuisance laws that just general nuisance law on their books that will apply. And, but some states do have drone specific laws. I authored an article for Commercial UAV News called Boots on the Ground, Drones in the Sky. And I outlined all of these. So I commend that to your attention for those of you that want to go out. You can Google it and find it pretty quickly, or go on the Commercial UAV website. But there's a number of states that have actually, and very specifically, made it a crime to fly a drone near critical infrastructure. The nuclear power plant example that you had at the beginning here. For example, let's see, I've got so many notes here. 9 different states, there's 14 bills, 9 different states, 12 laws with this critical infrastructure. For example, Arizona, Arkansas, Louisiana, the list goes on. Again, this merits a much longer discussion that we don't have the time for right now, but I'm happy to follow up with people. So besides the critical infrastructure piece, what else is there? There is trespass or nuisance, kind of talked a little bit about that. Some states created, California was the first out of the box, creating a peeping drone laws, like peeping Tom, but peeping with a drone, and made that a crime. Some states make it a crime to use a drone in hunting or for fishing. And of course the weaponizing thing, and then no drone zones. So some states and municipalities have created specific zones or areas where, for example, parks, where they do not want folks flying drones. And that's where the local law enforcement can actually have some teeth, right? They've got a statute or something to write on the ticket. And I know Ron can talk a lot more about that. And then kind of and by the way, it was Jeff Moore, so shout out to Jeff. He's asked a couple questions here. He's the one that said kind of you need to bifurcate this detection issue versus the the deterrence or the disable, destroy issue, and that is true. And so that's the second part, right? So once you know what's out there, what do you do about it? And again, it depends on what they're doing. But some of the things Travis talked about, you're talking about radar jamming. There are a lot of federal laws that you cannot cross over, other than what Ron said. What Ron was referring to was the Aircraft Sabotage Act. It's 18 United States Code Section 32, and it is a federal crime to tamper with, damage, or destroy an aircraft. And that's kind of the box that local law enforcement are in. That's the first problem if they need to actually take some kind of kinetic action, or they wanted to. And then the wiretap statute, pen register. I can go on and on and on. That these are not FAA regulations. These are federal criminal statutes that were not really written with this in mind. And so for that reason, then becomes, what's your authority? And what I would suggest to you that there is very, very limited authority out there. The Department of the Defense was the first out of the box to get authority. So it's 10 USC 130I. And, you guys can go look up that statute, but it's very, very specific about the kind of assets, the covered assets that a commander in the United States can protect from drones. And the means of protecting it is frankly classified. So we're not going to talk about that here today. But it wasn't until the 2018 FAA Reauthorization Act that the Congress then expanded the aperture and allowed the FBI, DHS, and the Coast Guard some additional and similar authorities. And the important thing about those two statutes is it says, notwithstanding any other provision of law. And what that means is the wiretap, all those other concerns, you don't have to be concerned about them if you're in the DoD, if you're in the DHS, because now you have specific statutory authority that kind of overrides those other statutes. The locals, the municipal folks, the state level folks, they do not have that authority. And that is the biggest challenge. It really limits what they can do as a practical matter. So that's a really broad overview. So much more to talk about, but I know there's other ground to cover, and I'll jump in when you need me.
Dawn, that's great. That was a tremendous amount of information. You've got that down pat. Thank you again for all your expertise on that. That was fantastic. Frank, if you could you follow up a little bit about the legislative side of this and what you see coming? We've got about 15 minutes left. I'd like to dedicate some time to that now, and then the actions the community can take if possible.
Sure, I'll try my best here. So what I'd like everyone to recognize and realize is that on any given day, you have 535 members of Congress who are not focused on really any specific issue. I mean, right now it might be the Virus Relief Act or something like that. But for the most part, you have a hard time getting the attention of the decision makers on what should be brought forward, what should be talked about, what should be acted on. So the first thing to do is to understand what we need to bring things forward. And that's where the UAS community and all the stakeholders have a role. Know that your member of Congress probably knows what a drone is, but doesn't know much more about what needs to be done and why it needs to be done. So there's a lot of legwork that has to happen with individual members. When I was chairing the committee, we went through a series of stakeholder meetings. We went through a series of one-on-ones with different people who were involved to try to understand what the real world problems are with what the federal government is attempting to do. So you've got the federal government in terms of the FAA, and then legislators who don't have any expertise in the background here, who are making laws that may or may not work. And that's why the input is so important from the experts in the area. And that's all, I think, everybody who's on this call today and thousands more, because the technology is going to continue to evolve. And the FAA continues to come to this game late. The integrated pilot program, they're going to discontinue that. The remote ID, they say by the end of the year, they're going to give us some feedback on that. There were more than 50,000 comments that came into them. So this needs constant pressure. And then I think the real way to move it is to make the connection with the key people on the committees. So in the case of the House of Representatives, it's the chairman of Transportation and Infrastructure. It's the chair of Aviation, Rick Larson. Traditionally, at least while I was there, this was a very bipartisan effort that went on with input from everybody and just looking for solutions. I'm not sure how bipartisan things are today, but we're not hearing much about it because the country is overtaken by the virus. The country is overtaken by the economic situation, and the country is overtaken every day by being, 100 days out from an election. So it's going to require a lot of attention and focus by individuals to keep these issues front and center, and to also prioritize them. Because if you go in with a list of issues, as chair of aviation, if someone came to me with a list of 20 things they wanted, it was like, please give me a break here. Tell me, you never did that, Ray. You came in with a very concise list, knew exactly what we had to do, and it all made sense. So that's what people have to do, have to make a priority. Let's knock off the most important things first, have a secondary list, but understand that this is very labor intensive. It requires a lot of one-on-one. I'll end there for now.
Hey, to dovetail on that, I mean, we just heard the term remote ID, and I don't think we can really walk away from this from this webinar without talking about that for a couple minutes, because again, to Jeff Moore's point, out in the audience there, remote ID really only addresses prong one, theoretically. Who the identification piece, right? How do you detect the person? Can you detect the person? It doesn't address prong two, which is now that if you know who they are, what can you do about it? So, some people think it's like the cure-all, but it's really not, because it's addressing only a part of this problem. And Travis and I and Ron, we've had a lot of conversations about this, especially from the law enforcement standpoint of, does remote ID for the local boots on the ground person, does it really give you what you need? Because my understanding, again, not having been a law enforcement professional, but worked with them throughout my career, when you roll up on a car, you have access to all kinds of information. The FAA database for registration for your drone, and even these message elements that are part of the remote identification, when you correlate them, that doesn't give you that the person has a domestic violence conviction. So there's a lot of gaps, I think, even in the remote ID rule. And I throw it out to maybe Travis and Ron if they wanted to take that on a little bit.
Well, as you know, I could talk about the gaps in remote ID for days, weeks, months, particularly the inability to put it all together. And I'll be very, very brief, because this can go on for a rabbit hole, because that's what RID really should stand for, is rabbit hole digging. The inability to understand the law enforcement piece, because that's what this is, of how that data is going to be managed. You're talking about micro UTMs, and then third-party providers handling micro UTMs, handling that very sensitive information, PII information, transporting that information to a federal database, which will bang off of criminal justice databases, be sanitized, and come back. That part has not even been addressed. They say it's going to be addressed. We shall see, as Mr. Lobiondo has touched on about how they come to these topics, but very interested to see what that thought process will be in the long term.
Wow. All right. There's lots of issues for, I think, 10 more webinars that just came out of that conversation. So we'll look at this, and I'm sure we'll have some future webinars on RID or on the other aspects of this that just came out, because there's a tremendous amount that needs to be addressed here at the legislative level, or by the FAA, or by every other executive branch agency that's involved in the regulation of this type of technology. Let's take a look going forward. We talked a little bit about this, about the solutions that you all see to these problems. Like we've addressed the problems here. We see that there are gaps. There are technological gaps. There are lots of white papers out there about how things should work, but not a lot of practical motion toward making them work. So if you guys could each go maybe, and Frank, why don't you start? What do you see as a solution, and then we'll pass it along to the other panelists to weigh in on.
Well, I think the solution pretty clearly is one-on-one contact with members of Congress who are on a relevant subcommittee, or if there's a way to interact with leadership on any of these issues. Every relevant committee is loaded up. So transportation and infrastructure doesn't just have aviation. They've got everything with transportation and infrastructure, rail, maritime. And then when you get into aviation, they're not just talking about drones. You know, you want to talk about what they're going to do with the MAX and how they're going to figure out that. So, excuse me, it's going to be very important to be able to do that one-on-one. I know when I had a stakeholder come into me and talk about real results from the real world that they have to live in every day, that had a tremendous impact, both on me and on my staff and the aviation staff. And we tried to direct legislation that we were crafting based on what we were hearing, not guessing what we were thinking. So that direct contact is critically important, critically important. Without it, you might as well just throw a dart in the night. So I'll hold off at this point.
And let me bounce to Ron. Ron, what do you see?
Well, there's already models in place for technology to be used by state and local partners. Just having certain technology available only to federal partners puts us behind the 8 ball when it comes to response. There's obviously not enough federal partners to be able to address issues at stadiums and other large gatherings that may not fall under SEER or NESI events. But if you train the partners, the state and locals, again, we have our bomb techs across the country. Some are state police officers, some are local law enforcement officers, some are firefighters. You can train them in using counter UAS technology for mitigation under the prescribed rule book and make notification after the fact. Like I said, it's not about reinventing the wheel. And also, to Frank's point, is engaging your local lawmakers so they can put the pressure on state lawmakers and also for congressional influence as well.
Travis, what say you on this topic?
Well, the one piece we forgot to mention that I always try to hammer home, and a lot of the attendees know about this, that I think that we also need to, it has to be forefront. Obviously, we've mentioned RID, COAS, but a big part of that is the privacy piece. And anybody that's engaged in this industry at any level better be paying very poignant, careful attention to the privacy piece and how that's going to inform what they do going forward. Whether you're just a service provider collecting data, or a COAS company, or you're going to be a UTM provider, that privacy piece is going to really, it's becoming, you see this this ebb of this coming up now from the ACLU, Electronic Frontier Foundation, and these others, is anything that a drone company industry touches right now better have that privacy piece in the back of their mind. And that's the last little thing I would want to say.
All right, Dawn, you get the last word on this.
All right, woohoo. So I'm looking out in the audience here, and there's a lot of friends out here, and so I'm going to kind of break it down and maybe do a couple shout outs to some of them, because when we think about what Jeff Moore said earlier about kind of the, breaking this out into detection, so and neutralization, right? So we got Luke Fox out here with his company that does counter UAS, and so White Fox, and so I think we've come a long way on that aspect of it. Can we detect the threat? The second piece is, what do we do about that? And I think that's where Mr. Lobiondo and this legislative fix is really key. We've got Chris Carodi out there. Hey, Chris from Droning On. He writes about this stuff all the time. He's really passionate about it. Elizabeth McQueen from Kimley Horn. They're doing engineering solutions. I've got my colleague from Drone Responders Law and Policy Committee, Mary Caitlin Ray, from the Crowell Law Firm out there. And Peter Schmidt asked this question. I think this is important because it wraps it all up. What he asked was, whose responsibility is it to train law enforcement? And because really, at the end of the day, where the rubber meets the road, you're not going to have unless it's a special event like Travis talked about, Ron talked about, it really comes down to that local law enforcement and what they can and cannot do and what training they have. And the answer is, there's not a lot of training out there from a, practical standpoint, of people doing training sessions. Now, What I will say is go on the FAA's website. You know, they don't have the funding to have a mega training program, but they have the LEAP program and they have a ton of resources. It's LEAP. You can Google that, find the information. There's, you know, there's little handy dandy cards with, you know, the acronym drone, and if you respond to an incident, what you should be looking for and things like that. There's YouTube videos that you have to watch, and so lots of information out there. And so that's my last point. This webinar, other webinars are key to educating local law enforcement and those that advise them, which is why I gave a shout out to a fellow lawyer out there, because, you know, the lawyers also need to understand what the rules are to advise their clients, especially in the public service and law enforcement arena. So a lot of work to be done, but we will get there. And, you know, at the end of the day, you know, we've been talking about, I'd say, the dark side of drones today, counter UAS, but there's so much goodness, you know, drones for good. I would love to end on a positive note, actually, because I think we always dwell on the negative cases, but especially with COVID-19, we've seen so many positive use cases. And I'm hoping that those positive use cases will impact public perception in a way that, you know, that makes this technology, just takes it to a whole new level. So that's all I've got. Again, it was a pleasure to be here. And so thanks for that, Ray.
Oh, absolutely, Dawn. Thank you so much to all of our panelists. We're just about out of time. Thank you to all the attendees for your support. You know, check out our website, urbanlowaltitudetransport.org. We're on LinkedIn. We're on Twitter. We're going to post this video. We're going to, if there are any questions unanswered, we will try to get answers, post them on the website. Additionally, look for us to put on another webinar, hopefully in the near future. One of the topics we're looking at doing is urban air mobility in the New York City metro market. I know we've got some people out there that are very interested in that based upon the, you know, the geography, the demographics. So that's kind of where we're aiming, but we will be definitely doing more of these. This one came together under emergency circumstances here. Hopefully the next one will go even smoother than this. But thank you again for attending. We greatly appreciate your support. And we'll call it there. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everybody out here.